Spock here, Captain Kirk.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilization.
Live long and prosper, Miranda.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
The crew will not understand it. It's not logical that you are Serac. Live long and prosper.
Hello, this is Roy Ivey with Sci-Fi History. Welcome to another exciting episode, this time focused on Star Trek, 55 years. Okay, not 55 years. We're going to cover the quick, fast evolution of Star Trek that made it into what it is today. We're going to cover the first 2 pilots, plus the first aired episode, The Man Trap. Join me, won't you? What we know as Star Trek changed very quickly in its very beginning. And if things hadn't gone just a certain way, we would have wound up with a Star Trek that was quite different than what it is today. We may have ended up with no Star Trek at all. Let's examine. When Gene Roddenberry first came up with the idea of Star Trek, he pitched it as a wagon train to the stars. He saw it as a Western traveling across the galaxy, replacing the wagon train with spaceships, 6 guns with phasers. But Gene had ulterior motives. He also wanted to write stories about things that he wasn't allowed to write on normal network TV because it wouldn't get past the censors. But mixed with fantasy, he thought he might be able to get some of this by and tell the stories that he really wanted to tell. So he crafted a pilot, and it was a very bold undertaking. It was titled The Cage, and it starred Jeffrey Hunter and guest starred Susan Oliver. It also introduced a character that would remain synonymous with Star Trek for years and years to come: Mr. Spock. The Cage was a bold undertaking. Now, The Cage was a very good, but it differs from Star Trek in many, many ways. You can't help but watch The Cage and think how much more fun the original Star Trek came to be. It was much more colorful, much more fun. The lighting was subdued. The colors were muted in The Cage. The story of The Cage centers around a non-corporeal mind prison, a gilded cage, if you will. The Cage harkens back to good science fiction films of the 50s, like Forbidden Planet. And it has high concepts, complicated matter, weighing all sides equally. Jeffrey Hunter plays a much moodier captain, more driven, but also more conflicted. Of cosmetic differences. There were see-through communicator, gooseneck lamps on every desk, darker lighting, in general a muted color scheme. Missing from The Cage is the fun camaraderie, the general humor, general uplifting tone was missing from The Cage. Excuse me for a moment, please. Do not be alarmed. Sorry. Turns out I am not in a cage. By the end of the cage, you can't help but doubt or have questions about your reality.
Now, she does a good job, all right. It's just that I can't get used to having a woman on the bridge. No offense, Lieutenant. You're different, of course.
Now, most of the cage did wind up being broadcast. Those 11 and 12 of Star Trek. In the end, Jeffrey Hunter's Pike convinces the Talosians that humans will not accept captivity. In fact, in most cases, we would prefer death rather than the loss of our freedom. The Talosians release Captain Pike and his crew. But surprisingly, Vina chooses to stay. Now this sets up a interesting dilemma for Captain Pike's argument. And Captain Pike gains a better understanding of the Talosians, Vina, and even himself. Now, let's talk about Star Trek, the proposed series. The NBC executives were looking at the pilot. And to be honest, they felt a bit betrayed. Roddenberry did not deliver the wagon train to the stars that he had promised. And they felt that the story was too cerebral, and that modern day audiences wouldn't understand it, at least those of the 1960s. Luckily for Roddenberry and for us, there was enough interest from the network executives to approve a second pilot, which was unheard of those days. But it was explained to Roddenberry there must be more action and a more understandable storyline. Star Trek had received its first reprieve, which opened the way for where no man has gone before. Speaking of where no man has gone before, let's take a look at another reinterpretation of the beginning scene of Where No Man Has Gone Before.
Your move, Captain.
We should have intercepted by now. The bird said they'd call.
I'll have you checkmated your next move.
Have I ever mentioned you play a very irritating game of chess, Mr. Spock?
Irritating. Ah, yes. One of your Earth emotions.
Certain you don't know what irritation is?
In fact, one of my ancestors married a human female.
Terrible, having bad blood like that.
Well, to be honest, I don't think anybody was ready for that. Where No Man Has Gone Before had to deliver in a number of areas and to overcome NBC executives' objections. First off, none of the executives were happy with having a woman of high importance on the bridge. And they insisted that number one be eliminated and that women would be in subdued roles. The executives were upset with the satanic look of Mr. Spock, and they were afraid that he wouldn't play well in the South. Roddenberry fought this and eventually won out. Spock lives on to be in Where No Man Has Gone Before, but unfortunately, no one else survived. NBC was fine with the performance of Jeffrey Hunter in the cage, but unfortunately, his wife thought that Jeffrey Hunter was a movie star and too good for Star Trek, and urged him to quit. In an effort to appease her, he did so. Jeffrey Hunter tried to make amends later, but unfortunately, he'd already been replaced by William Shatner. So Pike becomes Kirk, and Kirk and Spock go where no man has gone before. Everything was on the line then. Star Trek had to deliver. The story of where no man has gone before is the story of what happens when frail men develop the power of God. What does that mean? As man reaches out, the Enterprise answers a distress call from the Valiant, which had been lost many years ago. Look, the distress beacon tells the tale of the Valiant and how it attempted to break through the galactic barrier. But one of its crew was affected and developed extremely powerful ESP powers. It appears that the Valiant and the captain actually ordered its own destruction. The Enterprise chose to follow the Valiant into the galactic barrier. Events occurred pretty much as they had occurred with the original Valiant. Where No Man Has Gone Before guest starred Gary Lockwood from 2001 and the accomplished actress Sally Kellerman. Sets up an interesting dilemma for Kirk. He must choose his loyalty to his friend, his duty to his crew and Starfleet, and to his own humanity. During the struggle, at times of weakness, Mitchell will revert back to his mortal ideal, and he would beg Jim to kill him. And unfortunately, that is what Kirk had to do. The Kellerman character was also killed during the process, died of her wounds from Mitchell. Where No Man Has Gone Before strove for high ideals, but it did have an honest-to-goodness fistfight for James T. Kirk and even a torn shirt. What was the verdict? Was this the final hurdle for Star Trek the series? This was the ticket. Star Trek was going to series. They still weren't happy with Mr. Spock, but they hoped that Gene Roddenberry would keep him to the background. Yeah, he'll do that. Star Trek and the Enterprise moves to series with the Man Trap. Why the Man Trap, you say? Well, as it turns out, there's production order and there's airing order. Desi Ailu was in charge of production order, but NBC decided which episodes to air and when to air them. They chose the Man Trap as first episode for Star Trek, probably because it had a monster, but this monster had drives. It had reasons for being. Reasons that Star Trek would explore time after time. The move to series brought along many more changes. The uniforms were changed yet again. The division colors were determined. Green, yellow for command, blue for sciences, and red for engineering. You may ask, why am I wearing a red shirt? Well, I noticed upon the reviewing of the Man Trap that no red shirts were killed. Isn't that an amazing thing? Something that we take for granted these days, that red shirts must die, as long as they're not Scotty or Uhura. Sulu plays a prominent role in the Man Trap, but strangely enough, not as a helmsman. That is to be established. The Enterprise is on a routine mission to M113, where they are resupplying a archaeological dig that is being conducted by Dr. Robert Crater and his wife Nancy, who Dr. McCoy has had a relationship in the past. So this is an important backstory element for Dr. McCoy. The Kirk, Spock, McCoy relationship is hinted at, and just the barest beginnings of that is shown. M113 is a desert planet. They have a great need for salt tablets. Upon their arrival, they encounter Nancy Crater, who, oddly enough, unknown to the landing party, each appears as a different woman to each man. Dr. McCoy sees her as his lost love from 15 years ago. Kirk sees her as a mature woman that you might expect her to be. Crewman Daniels sees her as a woman he spent time with on a pleasure planet. He embarrasses himself, and Kirk excuses him and has him wait outside. Crewman Daniels is lured away from the main site by Nancy. Crewman Daniels is wearing a green shirt. It doesn't save him, and he turns up dead, supposedly from a poisonous plant, which McCoy soon discovers was not the cause of death. Red splotches appear all over his face, signs of an unknown origin. Most of the episode is spent with the viewer knowing much more about what's happening than the crew of the Enterprise. We're left to watch the crew discover these events and the meaning of them. This invokes sympathy from the viewer for the creature, who is the last of its kind. Dr. Crater has formed a symbiotic relationship with it, and it's took on the form of his dead wife. Captain Kirk brings the couple up to the Enterprise. The creature has encounters with several Enterprise crew members, and crew members start turning up dead. The true nature of the creature is discovered, and Dr. Crater is confronted. Dr. Crater is not inclined to help Captain Kirk with his investigation. So it is decided to use truth serum to force Dr. Crater to help identify the creature. When this happens, Dr. Crater becomes a threat to the creature, and Dr. Crater is ambushed and killed. This happens off screen. The creature is supposedly intelligent, but apparently it can't find salt on the Enterprise except by attacking crew members, which I would think there's got to be an easier way, and the Enterprise would have an almost endless supply of salt that could be replicated for the creature. This is something that is not explored for very long. The story breaks down pretty quickly to, we must kill the creature before he kills us. Or I should say, she, or it. The creature seeks out a new protector in Dr. McCoy, since his feelings for her are strong. Or the image that she takes on of Nancy Crater. After an attempt on Kirk's life and Spock's demonstration of what the creature really is, Dr. McCoy is forced to make a deadly choice. Something that probably still haunts him. And he was forced to kill Nancy, the creature. Or, as some call her, the incredible salt vampire. The Man Trap was actually the 6th episode produced. Where no man has gone before, came out as Episode 3. And what was The Cage turned into The Menagerie, and that was produced in Episodes 11 and 12. So Star Trek has endured for 55 years. But it could have been much different. If the pilot would have sold in the first go-around, we would have had a much different Star Trek. It would have been written to Jeffrey Hunter's strengths, and probably would have been a lot more serious and less fun. Would it become the huge 55-year history that we've enjoyed? It would have certainly been different. Changes caused the second pilot, and we got Jim Kirk. Probably the biggest change in the course of Star Trek. And we get to series, and we get the bright colors, which color was a new thing at that point. If the NBC executives had accepted Star Trek from The Cage, Star Trek probably would have turned out more like The Next Generation, which is a much more serious captain covering much more serious subjects in a much more complicated way. I hope you enjoyed our look back at the beginnings of Star Trek and the choices that were made. Thank you for watching Sci-Fi History, changing times and time. And I hope you're here next week.
I always thought Spock was a bit of a pirate at heart.
Indeed, gentlemen. May I point out that I had an opportunity to observe your counterparts here quite closely. They were brutal, savage, unprincipled, uncivilized, treacherous, in every way, splendid examples of Homo sapiens, the very flower of humanity. I found them quite refreshing.
I'm not sure, but I think we've been insulted.
I'm sure.